Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a pleasure to be with you on this Wednesday. Today is the 3rd day of August in the year 2016. I need to apologize for not having a live program yesterday. I know that a program from last week was run in its place, and I appreciate that. I had a meeting yesterday afternoon that I really couldn't not go to, so I kind of had to back off at the last minute, and but I knew we'd be here today, so and we can pick up on issues we were talking about on Monday and finish up today because we've got our full program on this Wednesday. It's a rainy, dreary, damp day here in Appalachia, and at least in this part of Appalachia in southern West Virginia. My wife is on the road and is driving back from New England today, and she's in Virginia, and she hasn't yet hit rain. So apparently the rain is pretty well restricted to the southern part of the area, and she's going to get into it because it's been raining here all day long. It's kind of a damp, dreary kind of day, but it's not cold. In fact, it's a little bit more comfortable than it's been because it's cooler. So welcome to today's program. I apologize for yesterday. I look forward to today. I've got really 3 issues that I wanted to deal with in today's program. The third one is a continuation of what we were talking about on Monday, which is has an emphasis on higher education. And I kind of thought that probably the second hour would be probably devoted, at least a good portion of it, to that particular topic. I also have an issue that I would like to deal with because I came across an article yesterday, in fact, that it was one of those that you read and you suddenly say, that's a keeper. I need to read that one again. And so I did. And the second time I read it, I enjoyed it even more. I got a little bit more out of it, I think. It's pretty deep. And it's on philosophy. And I made the decision on the second reading that it really warranted our attention here at the Virtual Center. So I made up my mind that we would spend a little bit of time on that particular piece. And then the third item, which actually I'd like to begin with and open today's program with, deals with the current presidential campaign, more specifically the Republican side of the agenda in the person of Donald Trump. I'd like to offer a comment or two about what's happening in our political world. And the more I thought about this, the more I realized that when I heard Agnes's introduction to today's program, I began to realize that if there was ever an issue and a program that pertains directly to what the Virtual Center is all about, what it's always been about, which is the nature of the American constitutional system and the responsibilities of the citizens under that Constitution within this republic, it seems to me this one. Because here we are in the midst of a presidential campaign, and there are major things happening in this political campaign. I think they need to be addressed. I think it would be remiss of us to not do it. And especially since after today we won't be back together again until the 1st of next week, I really am not comfortable with holding this off because I really do think it's an important consideration that really warrants some attention. And I believe that over the next couple of days, I think those people who are listening, who regularly listen to our program, I can hopefully alert you to a couple of things. And then I think everybody can kind of be on the watch and on the alert for some of the things that might happen in the next 3 or 4 days. But anyway, let me first do the housekeeping duties that we usually open with, which is our phone number. That gives you the opportunity to share your thoughts and your ideas directly with our audience here at the Virtual Center. I do invite you to call and get on the air and raise your questions, make your comments or your suggestions or whatever. We've been dealing with a lot of topics. We will continue to do that. All of them, directly or indirectly, pertain to the structure of our republic and the responsibility of the citizens in it. And so as such, all of them, I think, are pertinent. And chances are the issues and the comments that you might have would also fall under the heading of legitimate considerations here at the Virtual Center. And given the fact that you do listen to this program and to the Head On Radio Network, I know, even before hearing from you, that what you've got to say is worth hearing. And I know that our other listeners would appreciate hearing from you as well. So if you are so inclined, we do invite you to pick up the phone and give us a call. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. And 4676, as you know, translates on your keypad to HORN, horn. My email address, if you'd like to just share your thoughts with me and let me put these things on the air for you, I'd be glad to do that. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN 906, all lowercase, all one word, no punctuation, no spacing, at gmail.com. And once again, I do call your attention to our Facebook page. We have a Facebook page devoted to the Virtual Center. I know many of you have looked at it because I've seen comments on it. I get emails about it. And each day it appears. When I check on the Facebook page, I'm usually greeted with one or two new reads, a couple of likes, and several visits. So I know that the people who are checking out our Facebook page continues to grow by the day, and I appreciate that so much. If you are a user of Facebook, just go to the homepage, and in the search box at the top of the page, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will be into our Facebook page. And the first item that I would like to address today, which relates to the Trump campaign and to the current election situation here in our nation, I did put an entry on Facebook earlier today on this. And so that really kind of signifies the fact that I wanted to open the program with this today. Like everybody else, I've been absolutely mesmerized over the last 4 or 5 days about the behavior of Donald Trump. Ever since Mr. and Mrs. Khan appeared on Thursday, the last night of the Democratic Convention last week in Philadelphia, and challenged Donald Trump and challenged the sacrifice, the lack of sacrifice associated with him, he has been reacting to this and to many other things since. And the fact of the matter is, most people, not just Democrats, but leading Republicans, many voters, many columnists, are beginning to kind of throw up their hands and say enough is enough. Mr. Trump needs to get off this issue and get back into the campaign. Especially that happens because the very fact that it is a political campaign for President of the United States implies and means that there are things happening in the nation and in the world which really are important issues and important considerations in our election system, in our political life. And they need to be addressed. And one of the advantages of a political campaign is to educate the general population, the voting population, on the issues. So it not only acquaints citizens with the candidates' particular positions on issues and the political parties' positions on issues, but it also educates the general population on those issues themselves. That's the value of the debates that happen when they debate issues. But as we know, this campaign, at least so far, and it's only a week old, hasn't really focused on issues. It continues to focus on personalities, namely personal attacks, one against the other. And Donald Trump has expanded that in the last several days to not only attack the parents of a Purple Heart recipient, of a war hero, their son, who gave up his life in Iraq, which really puts a lot of people who have endorsed Donald Trump's candidacy in a very difficult bind because he's attacking a war hero. And basically, the people who support him, the people that he should most trust, are begging him to get back into the campaign and get off this personal vendetta that he's on by doubling down on everybody who criticizes him about everything or anything. And I think all of us have been reading article after article after article in every major publication that's available. Everybody's writing about Donald Trump. And when you watch an evening program or one of these public affairs programs, whether it's on Fox or MSNBC or CNN or whatever, chances are that every single item on the agenda for the program is going to focus on Donald Trump. In other words, there's no question he's getting all the media attention, and it's not costing him any money, so he's really not paying anything so far to conduct this campaign. The Clinton campaign is spending a fortune in ads attacking Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is Donald Trump hasn't had to spend anything because he's spending most of his time making the news. He is what the news is about. And during the primaries, by doing this, he was knocking off one competitor at a time in his own party. Many people began to see this as shrewd politicking on his part. He was dominating the news. He was driving the day-to-day agenda. He was the headline each and every morning in each and every newspaper throughout the world. It's unbelievable. But the fact of the matter is, on everything, it seems to me, you reach a certain point where you might call it the saturation point or something. You reach the point where you begin to say, wait a minute, let's step back for a minute and take a serious look at this thing and figure out what's going on, or try to spend some time figuring out exactly what might be going on. And that's what I started to do this morning. I thought, after watching some of the news programs last evening before I went to bed, I would open today, get up this morning, and post something on Facebook about this campaign, because I really had a lot to say, and I'll mention a couple of those things. One of the programs I was watching last night made the point, it was very late, made the point that many leaders in the Republican Party, many advisors within the Trump campaign itself, and this is the word that they used, were suicidal. And Harwood, the columnist, was on one of the panel shows last night. I can't remember which network it was. I think it was MSNBC, but I'm not sure. And he made reference to the fact that the people in the Trump campaign, including Paul Manafort, were suicidal And now that doesn't mean that they want to shoot themselves or, put a gun to their heads or anything else. That's not what we're talking about. That they have just ultimately thrown up their hands in surrender and made the determination that there's no way in the world they can get through to Donald Trump. They can't slow him down. They can't dissuade him. They can't get him back on track. They can't, he just continues to run the campaign. And that Manafort had just kind of thrown up his hands in total frustration and said, I give up. And I thought that really warrants a comment on Facebook. So I made up my mind that I would do that this morning. And then one other thing occurred. News about the campaign, which I thought was significant as well. And that is that the Hillary Clinton folks, Hillary Clinton has one of the best organized campaign structures going. They have an organization on the ground in almost every state. And the fact of the matter is, many states that have traditionally not been involved in the election because they've been foregone conclusions, many southern states, and one of them, the one I can think of right now, is Georgia, which traditionally, over the last couple of elections, has been so solidly red and so solidly in the Republican camp that Democrats felt, President Obama during his campaigns saw it as a virtual waste of time to spend money, time, and resources trying to win Georgia, because there's no way to do it. Well, now the signs are beginning to surface that Georgia may be in play this year, and there are a number of other states, southern states, like that. I think Louisiana's one. I'm thinking that maybe even Mississippi might be one. And so the fact of the matter is, the Democratic apparatus, political apparatus, organizing or running the Clinton campaign, has really pretty well established a 50-state national campaign program. They have what they call boots on the ground. In other words, they have a ground game in most states. And one of the things that was reported last evening was the fact that even though they have a ground game in many of these states, the reality is that there really isn't a political campaign underway because the Republicans don't have a ground game. The Republicans in many of these states don't have a campaign underway at all. They don't have any people there. They don't have any offices. They don't have any phone numbers. In other words, they're not even participating in the election campaign. So the fact of the matter is, the Clinton machine is beginning to find that it doesn't have any Republican counterpart to compete with. So the question then is, what's going on? And the answer is that this Republican campaign is probably the worst organized. It's totally focused on the personality of Donald Trump. He is the campaign. And as he did in the primaries, he's not involved in the grunt work of putting together a campaign apparatus in order to get himself elected in various states. What's going on? And I began to think about that in combination with Harwood's presentation suggesting that Manafort and some of the other people involved in the Trump campaign are pretty well throwing up their hands in frustration because they can't seem to even get the campaign focused on the issues. And the fact of the matter is, there are some substantive issues. There are some real issues that the American people should know about. But they're not hearing about them because the campaign's not underway. Instead, what they're getting is Trump, 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 Trump. And so basically we're dealing with an electorate that, at least to a degree, is ignorant of some of the key issues. And they are key issues. There are issues that a Republican campaign should be focusing on about Hillary Clinton, besides the emails, besides her emails. This morning, for example, the story broke that the Obama administration had made a $400 million cash payout to Iran in January with the release of those prisoners that the Iranian government needed to release. And at least on the surface, it looked like payoff money in a kidnapping situation. And of course, the administration denies that. But this kind of thing ought to be looked at. It definitely ought to be on the table during a political campaign. But it's not happening. So this morning I sat down with the idea of putting something on Facebook, and I had a couple of lines to begin, and suddenly, like a thunderbolt, it hit me. And I deleted what I had, and I sat back and thought about this campaign. And one thing, the minute I started to think in this direction, I began to realize that there are hints. They aren't very prominent yet, but there are hints coming from a number of different sources about the mental health of Donald Trump. Maybe he's not in control. And if he isn't, nobody is. And then I thought back to yesterday and President Obama's appearance at the press conference at the White House with the mayor of Singapore, which was supposed to be about trade and economic development, commercial agreements and regulations and such. But as much as anything else, it became focused on the election because President Obama made the statement that Donald Trump was unfit to be president. And the question he was raising focused specifically on Mitch McConnell, John McCain, and Paul Ryan. And the president raised the question, how can these people continue to dispute some of the things that Donald Trump is saying and yet continue to maintain that they endorse him and support his candidacy? And the president made the point that at some point, these people have to say enough. And today, there's quite a bit of fallout over the president's comments because many people are thinking that the president really shouldn't have stuck his nose into this political campaign since this is his last year in office. But the fact of the matter is he's the president of the United States. And his responsibility is to preserve the Constitution of the United States. His responsibility is to look out for the welfare of this nation and the people in it. And if he really believes that one of the major party candidates for president of the United States is unfit to be president, then one, it would seem to me, could make a pretty good argument for the fact that the president has a responsibility to share that thinking with the American people. And suddenly, when I realized that, it began to dawn on me that suddenly this campaign has become deadly serious. And I don't think that I or anyone else can contribute anything positive to people's understanding of the issues by merely jumping on board with everybody else and continuing to point out the apparent stupidity or idiocy of some of the things that Donald Trump is saying and doing and not saying and not doing. Rather, maybe it's become time to really begin to look very carefully on what's going on, because this may be much more serious than any of us have allowed ourselves to believe. And once this particular vision began to form in my head a little bit, it dawned on me that I have a responsibility here at the Virtual Center to at least share this thinking. I'm not asking anybody to believe me or to buy into it or to suggest that I'm pushing alarm bells or anything else. All I'm saying is it's time for intelligent people to think and to begin to look very carefully and begin to abandon their political preferences and political priorities and begin to look at the whole situation from the perspectives of the best interests of the nation. It may be that when you do that, you decide that there's not really anything to worry about. I'm not sure. And the fact that I'm not sure worries me. And then this morning, I woke up very early and I turned on Morning Joe on MSNBC. It begins at 6 a.m. And I was listening to the television at 6 a.m. this morning in the 6 o'clock hour. And I'm guessing that there were a lot of people who weren't there, who weren't tuned in at that hour. And Joe Scarborough, the co-host, shared a story. And he prefaced it by saying that this is a story that he hasn't told anyone anywhere. But he thinks the time is right to tell it now. And he told the story, and it was very early this morning, so I'm not too sure how many people actually heard it. But it was about Donald Trump and about the earlier days of the campaign. When Donald Trump was in the midst of a contest with 14 or 15 competitors for the Republican nomination. And one of the things that happened in the early days of the campaign, and Joe Scarborough said, I've got to say this very carefully. I don't want to say this wrong. One of the things that happened was that the campaign brought in an expert on foreign policy and international affairs because it was becoming patently obvious that Donald Trump was woefully ignorant of world affairs. And you'll recall, I'm sure, that many people have joked and pointed out that Donald Trump seems to think he has worldwide foreign policy experience because he basically hosted the Miss Universe campaign. That's his exposure to the world. So the people behind him decided that he needed some tutoring. And they brought in a prominent expert on foreign policy and international affairs. No names. I have no idea who it was. He didn't say. And during the first session with Donald Trump, this particular foreign policy expert reported, at least to Joe Scarborough, I don't know how he got the information. I don't know how many other people have it as well, that during the first session, on 3 different occasions, Donald Trump had raised the issue of nuclear weapons and asked him very, very seriously, if we have nuclear weapons and many of the others who threaten us do not, why don't we use them? Three different times during the course of that tutoring session, Donald Trump asked that question. And Joe Scarborough's report this morning said, I haven't told that story to anybody because I really don't know what it means. At the time I heard it, I didn't know what it meant. And I didn't share it because I really can't put any more and give any more explanation to it than that. But now, in the midst of what's happening, as this campaign seems to be imploding, and the people responsible for it, including Donald Trump's own children, can't seem to bring him back and get him off this kick that he's on, this personal attack kick. Yesterday in Northern Virginia, for example, there was a Trump rally scheduled in a high school. And he reported that there were several thousand, he said 5,000, I don't know how many, people that wanted to go in to the rally. But the fire marshal's laws forbid anybody more than 1,000 people from being in that auditorium. And so 80% of the people who wanted to go to the rally were denied entrance. And Donald Trump went off the deep end about the fire marshals and about the rules, and began to point out that this was one further example of the extent to which the whole campaign was rigged. The whole system is rigged against him. And the more I've spent the morning thinking about today's program, the more this story that Joe Scarborough told about nuclear weapons seems to become a little bit more serious and a little bit more serious and a little bit more serious. And I'm beginning to think we've reached the point where we probably really don't want to laugh anymore, because I'm not sure it's as funny as it seemed. I think we've gone beyond the point, and I think it's become very serious. The reason I share this and take a half an hour of our program today to share this with you is, again, I don't want to ring bells or alarms or anything else. My purpose here is just to share this perspective and say, basically, what I'm asking you to do is kind of file it away and see what happens in coming days, and see whether more information, more things surface that indicate that maybe this is much ado about nothing. I'll be honest with you, I hope it is. I hope we're dealing with somebody whose ego is getting in the way of his common sense. If that's as far as it goes, then fine. But if it goes further than that, if there's more to it than that, then I think the American people have to think seriously about what they're going to do in November. And already there's talk within Republican circles about what the procedure might be for unendorsing a candidate or canceling the endorsement totally and making Mike Pence the Republican candidate. or finding somebody to come in at the 11th hour and head up the campaign or something. This is all new territory. People don't know what the rules are, what the options are. But the fact of the matter is the people in the know are beginning to speculate about next steps. I don't think they would be doing that if they didn't feel that there was some reason to do it. And the fact that prominent Republicans like Meg Whitman, for example, are coming out in support of Hillary, whether in fact that's just one person or whether it's the beginning of a trend, it's hard to tell. But we know that one of the things that came out yesterday during the interview with the Wall Street Journal that Donald Trump held was to raise the issue of the re-election campaigns of John McCain and Paul Ryan. And Donald Trump announced that he couldn't endorse either one of them. And Paul Ryan, theoretically, as Speaker of the House, is head of the Republican forces in the national government. He's third in line to be President of the United States after the Vice President. So for the candidate of his party to refuse to endorse him for re-election seems to suggest much more than just discord in the Republican Party. The party seems to be in relative disarray. And whether, in fact, the next step is going to be that one after the other of the prominent Republicans who heretofore have supported Donald Trump will begin to withdraw that support. And the first evidence of that happened, well, Meg Whitman was one. But another piece of evidence surfaced yesterday, and that's Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey, who basically took issue with Donald Trump over the cons and over his attack on the parents of this war hero. And that's the first time since he dropped out of the race himself that Chris Christie has taken a position contrary to Donald Trump. So maybe we're beginning to see the beginnings of a major political shift. We don't know, obviously, yet, but I think it's worth keeping our eye on. That's issue number one. And again, I had to basically share some of that thinking because it's been kind of on my mind all morning. It started last night, and it's continuing today. And one of the things I began to realize or appreciate, it's not that I forgot, I just didn't think about it, is the reason that I wanted to do this program anyway is because of the feeling and affinity, the emotional connection I have to the founders and to this political system. And if there's something in the offing out there, something on the horizon that might threaten the very existence of this political system, which I think is the best hope for not only for us but for the world, then I think I just can't not address it and deal with it. So with that, I welcome your reaction, your response. I know that there are people listening out there who probably do have one. And I'm not in a position where I want to argue for this one over the one that you might have. All I want to do is put this one on the table and ask people to see it and understand it and kind of keep an eye on it and see whether in fact it has real validity, or whether in fact it's just much ado about nothing. And as I said, I hope that's true, that it is indeed much ado about nothing. But I'm just not sure. There's too much to indicate that it might not be. So that's the first issue that I'd like to spend time on today. And that's kind of 40 minutes of our first hour. The second issue, and again, I realize that our break at the top of the hour is probably going to come right in the middle of this, and I don't know whether we'll be able to cover the whole issue between now and the top of the hour or not. If we can't, then we'll just extend it into our second hour, and we'll hold the higher education, going back to the higher education issue, for later in our second hour rather than devote the entire hour to it. But I mentioned that it dealt with philosophy. There has been a series, and I recommend it. And again, I know that there are a lot of people out there who probably can't and don't appreciate philosophy. And it's obvious that I do. I mean, I'm not that well-read. I didn't receive any training in philosophy. I took courses in political philosophy, and I studied many of the people that we've talked about, as you know, David Hume and obviously Madison and Hamilton and the Federalist Papers and those kinds of things. But as far as going back into the early Greek and Roman philosophers and stuff, my background's not that strong. What I know is basically what I've found, or what I've learned indirectly by trying to better understand the things that I do know and the things I wanted to deal with. But the New York Times, a couple of years ago, began to run a series on its opinion pages called The Stone. And the theme of The Stone is philosophy. And under that heading, in this column, a number of prominent philosophers have written columns and op-ed pieces that the New York Times has published in this column called The Stone. And one of the individuals, one of the philosophers, who probably has made as many contributions to this series as anybody else, is Gary Gutting, not Cutting, Gutting, Gutting. Gary Gutting, who teaches philosophy at Notre Dame in Indiana. In fact, Gary Gutting has published a book, which is a collection of the essays that he has written for The Stone over the years. So he's been a major contributor. He's one of the nation's most visible thinkers in the field of philosophy. Whenever I see, in looking at the New York Times, that there's an article in The Stone on the opinion page, I try to make a point to read it. Several times, sometimes I read it and just file it away and don't do anything with it, but occasionally I've thought enough of a particular piece that I've brought it to the forefront here on the Virtual Center in the past, because I felt that it relates directly to what we're about here at the Virtual Center. And when we get into the issues of the Enlightenment and into the issues of Voltaire and Rousseau and David Hume and many of the Enlightened philosophers that really contributed so importantly to the founding of this nation, to the thinking of our founders, I frequently realize that it's important to bring these people to the forefront and get them on the table and share some of the ideas and some of the thinking with you. In yesterday's New York Times, Gary Gutting published an article for the Stone which touched on the issue of religion, specifically the issues of Christianity and Islam in the world. This is a theme given the issue of terrorism and the issue of ISIS and the threats to the Western world that extremism in modern Islam is creating. It seems almost absolutely critical that we flag issues and articles dealing with this subject. Gary Gutting did that yesterday. I recommend the article to you. It's pretty deep. It's pretty abstract, but it's extremely important. And let me tell you in one sentence why. Gary Gutting's theme is the issue of violence and its connection to religion. More specifically, to the issues of violence and intolerance as they have played themselves out through the years in both Christianity and Islam. His point is rather clear and I think important. His conclusion is that Christianity has undergone serious changes in recent years and recent decades, and indeed in recent centuries, as a result of the Enlightenment. And what the movement that we call the Enlightenment has done, the writings of Rousseau and Voltaire and David Hume and Francis Hutchinson and some of the other Enlightenment writers of the 17th and early 18th centuries. David Hume died in the 1770s when the American Revolution started. But his writings in the early 18th century really laid the groundwork for Jefferson's thinking in the Declaration and for Madison's thinking and education at Princeton as well. What the Enlightenment did was secularize Christianity. In other words, the Enlightenment was so powerful an influence on the developing world during that period that it caused non-religious philosophical issues like ethics and morality and common sense to temper the extremes of violence inherent in revealed religion. His conclusion is that Islam has not yet been through that important change. And until Islam does go through that change, until Muslim leaders are forced to find accommodation and synthesis and symmetry between the secular world and the religious world, then significant elements within Islam are going to emphasize the element of violence and intolerance. Whereas for the most part, that issue has pretty well been put on the back burner among the world's Christian religions. Gutting's point, however, is that it is wrong for people to claim that fanatics have hijacked Islam and have perverted the elements of the faith. Gutting points out that intolerance and violence is inherent in Islam. It's there. It's there in Christianity as well. But the Enlightenment has tempered it in Christianity to the point that religion, Western religion, Christianity, has pretty well been able to reach accommodation with the secular world. To the point that many prominent religious people, many Christian leaders, have come to the conclusion that it's not only fanatic believers who can practice, who can be moral, but that in fact morality can happen even in people of different religious denominations, even among people who practice no organized religion at all. Islam has gone through no such phenomenon, no such change. And in fact, Gutting points out that in 2013, the Pew Research Center conducted a worldwide survey and found that in Iraq, Malaysia, Pakistan, and other nations in which Islam is officially favored, officially recognized. And what we mean by officially is that government and religion are linked and are together. As of 2013, a large majority of Muslims throughout the world believe that some sort of Muslim law, Islamic law, Sharia law, should be the law of the land. In other words, it's government responsibility to promote and fulfill the revelations of God's word as reflected in the Quran. And what that means is intolerance and violence for non-believers. What Gutting asks us to do in this article, and that's why I recommend it so highly, is to think seriously about what revealed religion means. Because both Christianity and Islam are revealed religions. What that means is that what the religion preaches are the truths that theoretically came directly from God. God has revealed how he or she wants man to live, what the law ought to be. And therefore, the Islam's believers, Christianity's believers, believe that their job as devoted followers of this revealed religion is to do everything they can to officially impose it on the world's people. The purpose of revealed religion is to spread God's truth as it has been revealed throughout the world. And that raises the question, what do you do with non-believers? It's one thing to convert people to your faith. But it raises the question, what do you do to people who will not convert to your faith? Do you tolerate their disbelief? Or do you force them to conform under the threat of death? And within the Old Testament and within the Quran is specific validation of violence. You can point to it. It's there. Moderates, both within Christianity and within Islam, will point to those portions of Scripture which speak to love and tolerance. But the fact of the matter is, violence and intolerance are there as well. It depends on what you want to find. Gutting says, the potential for intolerance lies in the logic of religions like Christianity and Islam that say their teaching derives from divine revelation. For them, the truth that God has revealed is the most important truth there is. Therefore, denying or doubting this truth is extremely dangerous, both for non-believers who lack the essential truth, and for believers who may be misled by the denials and doubts of non-believers. Given these assumptions, it's easy to conclude that even extreme steps are warranted to eliminate non-belief. We may say, Gutting says, that moral considerations should limit this violence. After all, don't people have a human right to follow their conscience and worship the way they think they should worship? This is the key issue in revealed religion. People can either accept ordinary human standards of morality as a limit on how they interpret divine truth, or they can insist that total loyalty to what they see as God's revelation trumps ordinary human morality and ethics. Consequently, in those portions of the world which haven't been forced, and it was very violent, we know the history of wars, religious wars in the West have been violent. But one of the things they have accomplished over time is to reach some sort of an accord, some sort of accommodation between the inherent nonviolence, the inherent violence and intolerance that exists in revealed religion. It has reached some sort of an accommodation with man's morality and his ethics and his common sense. and the expanse of capitalism and the spread of democracy and popular government in the world. All of these things have tempered the intolerance within revealed religion, and religious leaders have been forced to find accommodation between the two. And within the Christian world, that accommodation for the most part has happened. Not with everybody, because we know there are still extreme fundamentalist religious elements within the Christian world as well as the Islamic world. The people that bomb abortion clinics and such. We know that. But for the most part, accommodation has been reached. Gutting doesn't talk about it specifically in this article. But a key piece of that is Jefferson and Madison's success in promoting religious freedom in the 1780s here in America. By separating church and state, by taking away the official power of the state in pushing religion, that separation has caused Christianity to pretty well conclude that revealed faith, revealed truth, is a matter of individual conscience, not state government policy. And therefore, once it becomes a matter of conscience, then toleration becomes possible. Because if what I believe in my religion is between me and my God, or me and my church, then what you believe doesn't directly affect me. And I'm willing to let you believe. I may think you're crazy and I may think you're wrong. But the fact of the matter is, since you don't threaten me, I can tolerate you. That's what Jefferson and Madison were able to accomplish in 18th century Virginia. And that law of religious freedom in Virginia becomes the model for the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And when James Madison brings that Virginia background to Philadelphia to the convention in 1787, his determination to include separation of church and state and religious freedom as a key factor in the Constitution of the United States becomes critical. That's the most symbolic, most visible example of the extent to which Christianity has pretty well reached accommodation with the violent tendencies inherent in revealed religion. Islam, as of yet, has not gone through such an accommodation. As we mentioned, the Pew Research Center in 2013 found that a large majority of Muslims think that some form of Islamic law should be the law of the land. It found that 76% of Muslims in South Asia, 56% in the Middle East and North Africa, favored executing Muslims who gave up their religion, and that 10 Muslim countries revealed that at least 40% of their populations favored applying Islamic law to non-Muslims by making religious law the official law. Even if you are not a Muslim, you must abide by the teachings of Islamic law. That is there. So the question that Gutting concludes with, and I'll finish this and then we'll take our break. He asked the question, does this mean that Islam is evil? No, it does not. But he points out it means that it has not yet tamed to the extent that Christianity has the dangers implicit in any religion that claims to be God's own truth. Islam as a whole has not made the concessions to secular values that Christianity has. President Obama got into this and said the following, and it's absolutely critical. President Obama said, some currents of Islam have not gone through a reformation that would help people adapt their religious doctrines to modernity, to the modern world. This adaptation is what's going to have to happen before Islam reaches the same kinds of accommodations that Christianity did. But in the interim, it's not right to say that those in the Muslim world who are pushing violence are distorting the Islamic faith. They are not. And it's important to be aware of that. I think this article is incredibly important, and I think everybody ought to read it. It's in yesterday's New York Times. The title of the article, How Religion Can Lead to Violence. The author, Gary Cutting. Publication date, August 1st. It was the day before yesterday. I'm sorry. It was Monday. With that, I'd like to pause and take our break. It's about 8 minutes after the hour. Actually, 7 minutes after the hour. So we'll pause for 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll come back, and we'll have our last 45 minutes of our program here on this Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, thank you, Agnes, and welcome to our second hour, abbreviated though it is. It is 12 minutes after the hour, so we've still got the better part of 45 minutes left in our broadcast day today here at the Virtual Center. I plan to go back to higher education and pick up where we left off on Monday. And I'll review a little bit because I really think that this is the kind of topic that really requires that we kind of lay some groundwork, get people sort of all thinking on the same page or in the same direction, if you will. And then we can go on with what I think are some significant considerations in the relationship between higher education and economic development. That's really the theme. And I think it's an important theme, and I think all of us will agree that in this day and age, especially with the economic situation the way it is, one of the things that I didn't mention at the beginning of our program today, I talked about opportunities that the campaign ought to be focusing on in order to alert the American people to some of the major issues. One of them is the issue of economic slowdown. The numbers the other day indicated that the predicted growth, the growth of the economy has slowed substantially. And it's just a little bit above 1%, which kind of means what Donald Trump has been saying is that the economy is pretty well flat. And with the issues of jobs and all the rest of it being such a factor, and the issues of equality and the need for infrastructure development and jobs and all of that, it seems to me that this is an issue that all of us need to think seriously about. And that's what I'd like to spend the remainder of our time together on, is the issue of higher education. Let me preface that by sharing with you once again our phone numbers and my email address and all the rest of it as a way to give you an opportunity to chime in and to participate more actively in our broadcasts. The radio, the phone number to get you on the air with your thoughts and your ideas is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to share your thoughts with me in an email, waobrien906 @gmail.com. waobrien, OBRIEN 906 @gmail.com. And I do alert you, call your attention to our Facebook page, and you'll find a reference on Facebook that I put on there this morning. The very last item I put on relates to the election and some of the things that we said at the opening of our program today about Donald Trump and about the campaign and the current direction that it's headed in. So I think you'll find reference to that on Facebook. There's plenty of opportunity there for your comment. And again, feel free to drop me an email or to perhaps call in on Monday if you have something that you would like to say related to the issues of the election or to the issues of the gutting article. Again, let me recommend that you go to the New York Times August 1st, Monday, and look at the article under opinion by Gary Gutting on violence and religion. I think you'll find it's a keeper. It's a darn good piece, and it really warrants some serious reflection. But from my perspective, at least, it answered a lot of questions. It seemed to explain a lot. And most of the time, when we hear people get into this subject and theoretically try to explain it, what they give us is their particular preference, whether it's a strong religious bent or whether it's an anti-religious bent with much more emphasis on the secular and on philosophy rather than religion. But it's usually either or, one or the other. I think what Gutting does is kind of strike the balance and explain the difference between the two and how both of them need to come together and find accommodation. And he points out it happened in Christianity. It has yet to happen in Islam. And until it does, we're going to be dealing with many people who see violence as very logical and warranted as part of their faith. So with that, let's go back. We are at 17 after the hour. So let's go back to the issue of higher education. We were into this Monday, and I briefly will just touch on a few of the things we talked about Monday. And then I believe that I should be able to end our program today. I've submitted a piece for publication in the Charleston Gazette here in West Virginia on this particular topic, and I'd like to end the program today by sharing with you some of the things that I put in that particular piece. The issue, as we mentioned in the introduction here in this second hour, is the link between economic development and education, more specifically higher education. I think all of us would agree, there's no question, that when we talk economic development, when we talk about jobs, especially jobs that require pretty high-level sophisticated skills, we're talking about higher education. We're talking about training. We're talking about education. We're talking about both. And I would suggest to you that in the modern world, the traditional differences between training and education have pretty well become passé. They no longer exist as they did. When we were an industrial nation in the 19th and for a good part of the 20th century, as the major industrial producer of the world, the United States of America dominated the world economically. We dominated manufacturing. We dominated trade. The dollar dominated economic currency. It dominated international commerce. And we came out of World War I and World War II as the dominant nation in the world. So there's absolutely no question that as an industrial power, as a manufacturing power, the United States education system seemed to fit very well with that particular reality. The way I've put it in the article that I'll share with you later in this hour is, as long as the nation was industrial, as it was in the 19th and most of the 20th century, just as we were when the nation was predominantly agricultural, which we were in the 18th and early 19th centuries, the traditional way that we approached higher education, college and university education in this country worked. The fact of the matter is, most of the jobs in an industrial manufacturing environment didn't require college education. So the fact that colleges and universities went out and recruited the best and the brightest and used standardized tests and SAT tests, ACT, whichever test you take, in order to weed out the unprepared, was no problem. Because our thinking was that college education was only for the few anyway. The vast majority of us who needed a job to support a family could find one, and find a good one, in the manufacturing sector. And there were all sorts of professional promotion possibilities. We could become foremen, we could become managers, we could have white collar jobs in the office, we could be accountants and bookkeepers and trainers and all the rest of it, salespeople. And there were all sorts of opportunities available within that world for the well-educated. But the fact of the matter is, the bulk of our people were able to secure jobs and able to earn a good living with retirement, pension benefits, fringe benefits, health care, and all the rest of it, that made the growth of the middle class in our society more successful than it had been in any society on the face of the earth. We had the largest, most vibrant middle class economic growth the world had ever seen. And it was linked directly to the nature of the economy, to the fact that we were a capitalist society. Our government was committed to it. Our people were committed to it. There really wasn't any alternative. And the opportunities were there for everyone. And one of the key ingredients of economic activity, of the economy, was something the economists call creative destruction. We know that a feature of capitalism was always the ongoing process of competition driving the weaker competition out of the business. And jobs were constantly being destroyed, but new ones were being created faster. So the fact of the matter is, if you found yourself in an industry which was losing jobs and losing visibility, there was the opportunity to move into an industry that was on the make, on the growth side of the equation. And so the economists called this creative destruction. The whole idea of free enterprise, competitive capitalism, was the idea that change is constantly happening. And that for every opportunity that disappears, 3 or 4 new opportunities open up. And the result was there was all sorts of opportunity for people to move and to move up. And if you got some training, if you acquired some additional skills, went to school at night, for example, in order to get a degree in accounting or something like that, there were opportunities to move into management or into sales or into investing. There were plenty of opportunities depending on who you were. Everybody didn't need a college education. Everybody didn't need cognitive skills. Everybody didn't need to be a whiz-bang, creative, inventive, flexible kind of a person. And things like craftsmanship and workmanship and pride in one's work and pride in one's job and doing the best job you can and taking pride in what you produced and what you helped make was really a key part of the psychology of this kind of life for most of us. And within that context, the way we conducted college and university education seemed to be perfect. The people that wanted it and the people that had the skills, the cognitive skills, to be able to be successful at the college and university level and then go on into professional schools like law school or medical school or dentistry or something like that, could do it. And the people that didn't have those skills or didn't have those ambitions could find darn good jobs and live a quality lifestyle with a 40-hour week with time and a half for overtime. Many of us grew up on it. Many of us were committed to it. Most of us believed that it would always be with us. Few of us ever dreamed that we would be in a situation like we find ourselves in now. But the recession in 07 and 08 made very clear that technology, the so-called information revolution, was creating a new world. It was creating all sorts of skill demands, and it was making very clear that the vast majority of our people were ill-equipped to fill these skill demands for these jobs. Employers were being forced increasingly to go overseas to find the technological skills they needed because they weren't here in our society. Our education system was doing great for the few. But as industrial manufacturing jobs disappeared and weren't being replaced by new jobs, as creative destruction ceased to work, the jobs that disappeared were never coming back. And therefore, it became incumbent on people to really hone their skills and become skilled at things that many of them couldn't do. Many people found that they didn't have the education or the background to even be competitive in these areas. Many people were forced into service kind of jobs, working in restaurants and hotels and all the rest of it. And so what we had was a society where larger and larger numbers of people found themselves working in areas where they waited on the people who did have the skills and did have the abilities and were making the big salaries. And the inequitable distribution of goods and services, the unequal distribution of wealth and income in this society became a problem. Now, nobody can run for political office, whichever party they're in, that doesn't promise jobs, to create jobs. And so here in West Virginia, the Democratic candidate for governor, Jim Justice, has made education a key ingredient in his proposals, in his programs, in his campaign. And he promised that he would turn higher education, into an economic engine, and he would begin to reinvest in education in order to make West Virginia a place that people came to rather than one from which people continue to leave. And there we are. And last week, and this is Monday's program, just this past week, late last week, over the weekend, the Chancellor of West Virginia's higher education system, Chancellor Hill, published an op-ed piece in which he talked about the importance of higher education in West Virginia, its four-year colleges and universities, as becoming economic drivers in the economic revitalization that needed to happen here in West Virginia. But for those of you who were with us on Monday, you'll recall that I was quite critical of this piece, of this article, because there was nothing in it that suggested that colleges and universities in West Virginia intended to do anything differently than they always have done them. There wasn't one indication of change in the way higher education operated, except to do more with less, except to find ways to operate within a shrinking budgetary situation where state appropriations for higher education were being cut and being cut again and being cut a third time. And many institutions were being forced to do what they were required to do with less and less revenue to do it. But adjusting to a more restrictive financial environment was really the only indication of change in the way higher education in West Virginia operated. And the point that I was making on Monday was that if higher education in West Virginia is going to become a key ingredient in the economic revitalization of the state and its people, then an awful lot's going to have to change in higher education. And I had suggested a couple of changes that we would need to make in order to help bring about the positive changes that would be necessary in the state's economic future. And this particular piece is on our Facebook page. And what I did was include 4 questions or 4 suggestions as to the kinds of changes that would be necessary in higher education before higher education could really become a key player in this economic turnaround. And the first thing that higher education had to do, was change its whole mode of operation. Instead of higher education being there for the few, for the gifted, for the talented, for the skilled, we now find ourselves in a situation where higher education had to retool itself in order to serve everybody. No longer could colleges and universities continue to ignore 60% of the adult populations within the states in which they lived, especially when that 60% of the people are the people that are paying the taxes to fund the budgets that higher education functions on. Colleges and universities have been allowed to continue to seek only the skilled, only the talented. And in order to do that, They've hired recruiters. They've exploded the size of their admissions staff. And they are sending recruiters all over the nation and all over the world to recruit qualified students, and are totally ignoring the 60 to 65% of the adult population that's already here that is in desperate need of skill development and services. If this state's economy is going to turn around, we've got to find ways to serve the 60% that we never had to worry about serving before. As long as the economy was industrial, manufacturing, these people could get jobs. Now they can't. The few jobs that do exist require skills that most of these people can't even hope to compete for. They need services. They have to look to these institutions of higher education to provide those services. The fact of the matter is, if our colleges and universities actually began to serve these people, our colleges and universities wouldn't be losing enrollment. Their budgets wouldn't be shrinking because their enrollments are declining. They wouldn't have to have all of these people on staff that are flying all over the country to recruit qualified students. All they would have to do is serve the population that's already here. And they would be bulging at the seams. And they would be hiring staff, not laying them off. Part of this is technology. This is a rural state. The ability to move from here to there and to get around physically is not easy. The interstate system has much improved situation, but the fact of the matter is, Appalachia is not an easy place to physically move around in. The roads that one must drive in order to travel 20 miles make a 20-mile trip a trip that one could make in 15 minutes in another environment, in another physical environment. So therefore, technology has to become a key factor in the way higher education serves the population it needs to begin serving. But that doesn't mean dumbing down the product in order to serve students who don't meet qualifications or who don't meet muster. What it means is revamping the entire education system so that the people who are here can meet admission requirements and admission standards. You don't change the standards. You don't lower the bar. You improve the qualifications of your people. And we need to use technology to do it. The other thing we need to do is repair the disconnect between the availability of the services and the people who need those services. You can't continue to have instruction function on a daily schedule of 9 o'clock in the morning until noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon and expect adults in a rural state to come to you during those time periods or not avail themselves of the services. No longer can we afford the attitude that some people in higher education have. If these people were really serious about education, they'd be willing to drive the hour or hour and a half it would take them to come to campus. If we're going to bring education to these people, we've got to deliver it. And we've got to use technology to do it. But the education we deliver has got to be the same quality that people would get if they came to the campus. You can't dumb down the product. In order to claim you're serving a population. Because what you're doing is perpetrating a fraud. You're turning the entire higher education system into the fraudulent product that we're seeing with the hearings on Trump University. Promising everything and delivering nothing. We can't afford to do that. That's shooting ourselves in the foot. That's not doing anything to improve the economy of the region. What has to happen is that schedules have to change. The instruction has to be available when the people who need it can get it. That must probably means nights. It undoubtedly means weekends. It may mean early morning for people that go to work in the afternoon, who work at restaurants and hospitals and hotels, who are working afternoons through the evening into the night. They may need to get their education at 6 and 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. It's got to be there when these people can take advantage of it. Not when the people who teach want to deliver it. And the other thing, of course, is to get away from this idea that you have to scour the world looking for qualified people, rather than finding ways to qualify the people who are already here. That, it seems to me, is just a sampling of the kinds of things we've got to do differently if we really want to make higher education the economic engine, the economic driver that it can be, that it will need to be. And the fact of the matter is, this may be true. We're talking here about I'm talking about West Virginia. But the fact of the matter is, this applies to the whole nation. We can't continue to have Silicon Valleys, little pockets of skills and abilities located here, there, and everywhere around the country. And leave the rest of the people who surround these people out of the equation, out of the picture entirely. So I mentioned the article that I had submitted for publication. I don't know if it will be published. I hope it will. I'm kind of guessing that this weekend might be the time. The title, I've titled this piece, Higher Education, America's Economic Engine. And what I tried to do is explain the disconnect. The reason that we have this situation where higher education seems to be organized to deliver education in ways which no longer fit the situation. No longer can we afford the luxury of delivering high-quality education to just a few people and assuming that the vast majority of these people, the rest of the people, don't need it and couldn't take it, couldn't benefit from it if they did take it. Somehow, we've got to make sure that everybody can make it, that everybody can take advantage of it. And that means a totally new attitude in the way we do K through 12 education and in the way we do higher education as well. Traditionally, this is what I've said in the article, traditionally, most of the debates about higher education have focused on the difference between the abstract and the real, between the practical and the impractical, some people say. Others call it between what's useful and what's useless. No longer can we continue to devote the bulk of higher education to topics and subjects that people can't use, people will never need. What we've got to do, they believe, is turn education into meeting the needs of what the nation needs. We've got to get off this soapbox, they feel. So, and the first one to really take this idea, the first one in this country to really take the idea of making education more practical was Benjamin Franklin. He was involved in the planning of what they called the Philadelphia Academy. It later became the College of Philadelphia, and after that it became the University of Pennsylvania. And we know that the University of Pennsylvania still exists. It's an Ivy League school, and it's one of the top universities in the world. Franklin's position was in drawing up the curriculum for the College of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Academy, that the education or the curriculum had to take into consideration the kinds of work that people would be doing. Or as he said, it would be well if they could be taught everything that is useful as well as everything that is ornamental. The ideal would be if they could get what they need as well as get what's the arts, what they can't use but everybody says they need. But we can't do that. And in 1747, in his proposals relating to the education of youth in Pennsylvania, Franklin said, "Art is long and the student's time is short. The only answer," he says, "is to design curriculum that takes into consideration, quote, the several professions for which the students are intended." In other words, if education is going to be useful, if we're going to maximize the value of what we're doing, we've got to shape education around the particular way of life that the people who need it are going to live. Almost never does anyone in today's world challenge that. Most people who want to reform education claim that what we've got to do is we've got to teach what people need, not just what we want them to have. We've got to get rid of what many of these people refer to as the fluff of higher education. Nobody seems to be defending tradition in education until now. It is my belief that the challenges we face in higher education force us to rethink and to go back to this model of education which used to work for the few. We've got to make it work for the many. We've got to make sure that the many, all of our people, can meet the standards that education used to require of only the few people that took advantage of it. When the wealthy went to college, they met standards. We've got to find ways to help everybody to meet those standards. Changing the product, making education more practical, hasn't cut it. Because the fact of the matter is, changes are happening in the economy more quickly than we can develop programs, educational programs, or curriculum to meet those changes. By the time we start to graduate students in the fields that are out there, they're not there anymore. Those jobs have gone, and there are all new sets of demands, new sets of need, new skills, and we got to go back to the drawing board. How many times have you heard people say, I would like to go back and get more education. I'd go to college, but I don't know what to take. I don't know what jobs are going to be in demand 10 years from now. The fact of the matter is, neither do the colleges. They don't know either. What that means then is we've got to go back to the model that higher education used to follow before we wanted it to meet the needs of everybody. Education, quality higher education, used to be modeled on the assumption that education needs to be able to meet or address change. In order to deal with it, we have to educate our young people, our people, to be able to handle change. We've got to teach them what they need to know in order to be self-learners, in order to teach themselves. We can't continue to get them to depend on us to teach them what they need to know. Because to be very honest, I taught in college and universities for more than 50 years. There's no way in the world I can teach students what they need to know in today's world because I don't know. What I've got to do is educate them so they can deal with what they're being confronted with out there. They can come back to me and ask me to help them, but I can't help them. I don't know what it is. I'm not equipped to deal with the skills they need in today's world. What I've got to do is educate them so they can deal with that. I've got to turn these people into self-learners. And in order to do that, we've got to get away from this model of education being practical, away from the idea that I only have time to take what I'm going to use. Don't waste my time with stuff that I can't get a job in. We've got to go back into creating self-learners, into educating people who can educate themselves. And we've got to begin to prepare our teachers to teach that way. When we do it, our schools will become engines in the new economy. At that point, higher education really will become an economic driver in economic development. Until it does, it will remain for most people, except the very highly skilled, highly talented, education will remain a non-factor. We'll be continuing to turn out people that employers tell us can't do anything. We're turning out people who can't read. We're turning out people who can't think. We're turning out people who can't read, who can't write. We're turning out people that aren't self-learners. We're turning out people who are looking to supervisors constantly to tell them what to do. I did that. Now what do you want me to do? We've got to have people that know what needs to be done and are equipped to learn how to do it, and not have to go back to college and take a course every time they're confronted with something they don't know. They've got to be able to figure it out for themselves, and we've got to educate them so that they can figure it out. That's the trick. This is not something that doesn't exist. In 1828, in response to exactly the same environment we have now, Yale University was being confronted in New Haven, Connecticut, by businesses who wanted the Yale curriculum, who wanted Yale College to readjust its curriculum in order to prepare people to become salesmen and merchants and bankers and investors and all the rest of it. In other words, they wanted college to become professional school. And in response to that kind of pressure, to stop teaching foreign languages, stop teaching Latin and Greek, start teaching us what young people need, not what you want them to have. Instead of doing that, the Yale faculty made the case for what they were doing. And their argument was, what we are doing is creating people, educating people who can teach themselves. That's what we do. That's what we need to keep doing. And you got to let us do it. That was the case. The Yale Report, which was written in 1828, 1828 is the year that Andrew Jackson is elected President of the United States, November of 1828. That's the very same year that the Yale faculty put out the Yale Report, in which they made the case for what they do and how they do it. They only did it for the very bright, for the very wealthy. We need to figure out how to do it for everybody. What they lay out in the Yale Report is a point-by-point explanation of what we need to do and how we do it. What we need to do in today's world is prepare our young people to handle education taught that way. Those are the standards. That's the high bar. We've got to understand that bar. But more importantly, we need to know how to prepare all of our people, not just a few, all of our people to meet it. Because the fact of the matter is, everybody can learn. Everybody can't learn to the same degree. Everybody can't be as creative and as inventive as everybody else. We know that. But everybody can learn. The example that I've used in the past here at the Virtual Center is a supermarket. You don't have to be a genius to know that after you've gone to the supermarket a few times, you pretty well know where things are. You know what categories of products are located where. So depending on what you know, or depending on what you know and what you need, you know where it ought to be within that grocery store. It's not organized randomly. It's organized. It's structured. And it doesn't take you too many visits to the supermarket to figure out where stuff is. If you walk into a supermarket you've never been in before, chances are you're going to be able to find 80 to 90% of what you need because you know where things ought to be. That's because you've learned. Everybody can do that. Everybody who can shop at a supermarket can learn. That means that everybody, to a degree at least, can handle this learning approach. Everybody can learn. This is the only way that we can really fulfill our obligations to teach people up to their potential. And we've got to start doing it. And I'm hoping that this article will be out this weekend in the Gazette. If it is, I'll share that information with you Monday. If it is, I'll put a link on our Facebook page and it'll be there for you Monday. If not, then I'll bring it to you and we'll go through the article on Monday in Monday's program before we leave this topic. But right now it's 59 minutes after the hour. Our broadcast day is done. Our broadcast week is done. I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for tuning in today. I want to thank you for your continued support of Bob Kincaid and Agnes and the folks at the Head On Radio Network. Have a wonderful evening, a wonderful weekend. Be kind to each other, and thank you.